continuing with ASP.NET Core, making a MVC application which uses CRUD, that's create, read, update and delete facilities. So when we run our application, we want to be able to delete a student from the database. So in our standard MVC, we've got our models, which is indeed a student class. We can see here we have the controller, which is the home controller, which we're going to make additions to, and also we have the views, have an index view, and we're going to have a delete view as well. So I wonder what the name of the database is. Well, let me go and look at the context and take a look. It says there, oh, my test 12. So let me go and take a look at that particular database and take a look at the table as well and see what indeed we are going to try and delete. So if we look at databases, and then it's my test 12 that we're looking at, and take a look at those tables. And there's our table, our students table that we're interested in. We'll view the data, and we've got, well, then we've got one student there, and student ID is 18. So what we're going to do is to delete that student and make a form to do that. So let's run that by clicking the triangle. We'll run our app. And I want to be able to type in here the name of the controller, the home controller, followed by the name of the action. And that ought to bring up some form we're going to design. And then the student number was 18. Let's see if we can go and get rid of that. So I can click on the submit button, and that should be deleted from the database. Well, oh gosh, doesn't look like it. Well, if we refresh our database, we should find that it's been indeed deleted. Maybe I need to put another student in there while we'll be experimenting. So we can put a person in here with a certain age and student number 29. So let's see how we went about doing that. I'll just stop the program and take a look. I'll take a look at what the addition I've made to the controller. So we're going to focus on the controller and the view, which is the delete view. So we want the controller to more or less call this, present this delete HTML page. So let's just focus on just doing that. So we want to take a look at just running the program and then typing in the URL, and all that does is brings up the form. Nothing else. It doesn't do any deleting or anything. It just brings up the form, and you do that by the name of the controller and then the name of the action, and that should bring up that form. Okay, let's just focus on that. Well, in our controller, the home controller, the code that I've written for that is, if I can find my controller, all I've done is written this code here. Now all that does is, well, this is redundant. We could just delete that. It's understood that it's a get. In other words, we're going to be using the URL. The action is called delete. So when I just typed in home delete, it went to this action and returned the view. Now the view by default will have the same name, which is the delete. So all that does, that bit of code, is to produce this form here. Now we can just, we're not using that. It's all we've done with that form is a bit of HTML which puts on a label and a text box, and a button which will submit the data that is retrieved from those controls. You'll also notice that in the CS HTML file, or the view, there's a reference here. Now that's extremely important. What that does is connects the data, which is this data here, the student data, it connects it to the view. So you can think of that model as being now a variable which will represent the student class which has been passed to that view. So as you can see, model here, model ID, that's the ID field of the model, is all we're going to be using. We could use the name and so on, but we'll just use the ID to make it simple. So I think I'll just emphasize all that by putting a breakpoint in here. I'll go back to my controller, and the index it's the delete we're looking for, so we could put a breakpoint in here and just confirm that that's what indeed happens when I run the code and I type in the URL. And you can see it's simply gone into the controller. It's found the name of the controller. It's a bit weird really, but it pulls out the name from the actual name of the class, and that becomes the name of the controller as well. So now it's gone to the delete action, and it will just return that form. So if I press F11, should return the view, and it should indeed go into the delete view. Just to emphasize, the name of the action was delete, and so the view that will be retrieved by default has got the same name. There is ways of changing that. In fact, you can just type into here the name of the view that you want, but by default it will give a view of the same name. So you can see here delete is the name of the view. So if I just single step that now, that should produce my form. So I single step, and eventually I can see my form. So that's just the first stage. It's really fairly straightforward. Just to emphasize, we've got a controller which reacts to the URL. It therefore uses a get and produces a view, by the way, which is in the same folder name as the name of the controller. That's where the view goes, in the views folder. It'll look in there by default, but the home is the name of the folder in which the view is stored. So you need to remember that when making views. So I'll just take that breakpoint off. I might as well take that one off as well. Now the other code that I've written, not very clear, but the essential bit is here. You can see it's a post. So that means the post will react to this view. So it's gone from here, the get, which takes us to the view, and then when we use the submit button, it will take us back to, by default, the same name is the method. You could actually change that to some other name, and you would then include that in your form here too. But for the moment, the default is back to the delete. So what's happening here? We make a variable which represents the database. It's the database context. Then we use this to find the first student. So if the ID is passed in there, it will find that particular student and then remove the whole student. You just don't want to remove the ID. You want to use that ID to find the student and then remove it. And then don't forget your save changes. And finally, we redirect back to the index page, so that will produce the index view. I guess I could put a breakpoint in here as well and run the code. So just to emphasize really in summary what we've got here, we've got a get which actually produces this form in the first place, and then we've got a post which reacts to the form. So it's a one way and then back again. So if I now run the whole thing, I'll just keep in mind what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to delete that student whose ID is 29. So once again, if I put in my URL and home delete, the controller and the action, and then 29 is the name of the student that I want to delete. So if I click on the submit, indeed it's gone back to my post, so back from the form to the post, and let me check, yes, the ID is 29. So now if I single step F11, it's now gone off to my database context. The database context, you can see, to go and basically pick up the database. F11, that should take me eventually back to my controller. F11. Here we are back in the delete. 29, so far so good. And then let's see what student we've retrieved. Well, we can take a look at that student. Oh yes, that's nice. It's going to remove the whole student, not just the 29. So then I can save changes. It's fairly straightforward code, and finally redirect back to the index page. It remains now to look at my table and see, well, it's still there for the moment. If I do a refresh up here, you'll see that it's completely been removed. Incidentally, if you get fed up with typing in home in the URL, home and then delete, you can actually modify it down here. So instead of the index page being the default, we can have the delete. So that means when I run my program, this URL will be the one which starts up. So let me check to see if that's correct. So yes, indeed, it has by default gone to the home create. If I were to type in home create, it wouldn't make any difference. But it's interesting that the URL, the home create, doesn't appear there. So to summarize, we start off with a get verb, we call it, which simply returns the view of the same name, which is this delete view. Now the view has a reference to the model, so when you say MVC, this is where the V and the M are connected, if you like. This produces the form, which has got a text box, and that's referring to the text box on the form. So when you input, you will input into that text box by clicking the submit button. That will then return things to the post with the name of delete as well, and that where it alters the database. So and incidentally, what we could, if we said that this code calls the delete method of the post, what if we wanted to change that to something else? Then we would need to include in here the name of the action which the post will call. And notice that we had nothing there originally, so if I were just to delete that and return this to delete, so how does it know to call the delete in the post? And the answer is because the name of the view is delete, it will call the delete method. So that's a simple way of creating a delete CRUD. Create, write, read, update, and delete. This whole operation could be performed without a form at all. We could do it by means of a URL, so we don't really need that form. And the way to do that would be in the get, we could put this code basically into the get, and then the delete would be performed by means of the URL, and we could even pass in the value of the student, the ID that we want to delete it. Well, let me think, now that should be up here I'm talking about, where you could put all your code to do the deleting in here, so you would not need a form at all. Now the disadvantage of that, of course, is security wise. If you're typing into the URL, then it's open for everyone to see, so that's why we make a point of using a post to by means of our form to do the delete.